the man with the dark tie. My tie's got rabbits on it.
We're okay, it's working. This is what it's about.
Oh.
Think this work? Hello?
What are you talking about?
I don't know.
Living up.
Hello?
Excellent.
Can you hear me? Oh. Hi, everybody. Welcome to CapX Live. This is our first event of conference, so I have the dubious honour of welcoming you. And we are here to discuss what levelling up really means. So I'm going to start with you guys. Do any of you have any idea what levelling up means? Anyone? I mean, doesn't that kind of go to show that it's, you know, the government's biggest promise? It's what you were elected on in 2019, and nobody really knows what it actually means. So I'm delighted to have 5 MPs here. Hi, Bim. To discuss this, to put some meat on the bones, as it were, of what levelling up really means. And I think MPs are the exact right people to do this. You are the guys who know what it means to your constituents and what they will regard as a success and ultimately get you re-elected at the next election. So, without further ado, let's start with Alex. What does levelling up mean in Rother Valley?
Great, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for having me. For those that don't know me, I'm Alexander Stafford. I'm the MP for Rother Valley. The seat went blue for the first time ever in 2019, which was 101 years of Labour rule. Yes, that was good. Well, first of all, that is levelling up after all, giving people a choice of politicians rather than being dominated by Labour as had been. But when it comes to levelling up, it means a lot of different things, but fundamentally, to me, it means fairness. It means about giving people in seats like mine in South Yorkshire the same opportunities that, you know, many seats have down in the south of England. We've got 2 people from the 2 MPs in the south of England, from quite prosperous seats, and I'd love to Rother Valley to be as rich and prosperous as your seats as well, and have the opportunities. But by opportunities, I mean don't just mean money. And let's be honest, everyone wants a new hospital and a new bridge and a new bypass. Every politician has those sort of aspirations. But that, to me, isn't fundamentally levelling up. Very nice to have, but it's not about levelling up. It's about levelling up the opportunities by giving everyone, no matter where in this country they live, where in this country they work, they have the same opportunities to go to school, a good education, have a good standard of healthcare, have a good standard of living, and are not forced fundamentally to move from where they are born and want to live to other areas for those opportunities. So that is incredibly important. But secondly, and I think more importantly, levelling up is about this government being on the side for everyone. So it doesn't matter where you live. So if you live in Maltby, in Rother Valley, is one of the poorest parts of the country. For poverty, it's in the lowest 5th percentile of the entire country. But I want everyone who's born and brought up in those parts of Maltby, which are desperately poor and need those opportunities, to understand they can achieve anything. They can get anywhere and achieve anything. And I think with 101 years of Labour rule, that aspiration was denied. The politicians did not listen to the people in the towns. The politicians ignored people. And it goes back to Brexit. My seat voted 67% for leave, yet the Labour politicians turned around to people and said, you're too stupid. You didn't know what you were voted for. You didn't care. We don't care what your views are. So it's not just about the government levelling up. It's the government listening to what people on the ground actually want and improving it. We as politicians can never say that we are better or know better than our constituents. We are responsible to them, and we have to build up that link that has been destroyed over 101 years to have that continuity in that link. That is levelling up to me.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I'm sorry, I just got overexcited and forgot to properly introduce everyone. So I'm Alice Denby, Deputy of CapX. This, of course, is Alex, MP for Rother Valley. We also have Bim Afalami, MP for Hitchin and Harpenden. We have Gareth Davies, MP for Grantham and Stamford, Deanna Davison, MP for Bishop Auckland, and Virginia Crosby, MP for Unismon. So sorry about that, that's everyone. And we're going next to Bim. So you've got quite a different constituency, much more what we think of as a traditional Conservative heartland. What does levelling up mean to you?
Well, thank you for that. Look, it's a pleasure to be here. I think, I agree with what Alex said, but I think that the core of levelling up has to be about improving economic capacity in parts of the region where the economic capacity is lower, significantly lower than it is in London and the South East. I think the core of this is actually about economic capacity, because too much of the language and how people think of levelling up is ultimately a redistribution exercise. It becomes people saying, well, you make this money in London or the Southeast, and what we need to do is we need to transfer a bit more of it to different parts of the country. Now, I happen to think the Green Book needs looking at. I happen to think the way how we allocate spending and infrastructure needs to be looked at. All of those things are important. But levelling up is something that will only mean something when, and I use Michael Gove's words over the last few days, where he talks about to achieve your ambitions in life, you shouldn't have to move south. You shouldn't have to move to London or move somewhere else. The only way you're going to keep the most ambitious, interested, aspirational, dynamic people in parts of the country like the Rother Valley or others that are the areas where we want to focus our levelling up is to provide economic opportunities in those places. Now, what does that mean? For me, it really means two things principally. We need to use market signals to incentivize capital to move and be invested in parts of the country where they are not currently being invested. And secondly, on the skills side, we need to deliberately use the government's weight and influence and laws to improve skills in parts of the country where there are skills deficits. And if we can match up those skills with that capital investment, that's when levelling up becomes a reality.
Thanks very much, Bim. Gareth, we'll go to you. What does levelling up mean in Grantham and Stamford?
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's great to see a former constituent at the back of the room in cardboard form. If you talk about achieving things, Bim, going from a Grantham grocer's shop to Great Halls of British Power, I think, is a clear example of that. I take issue slightly with what Alex was saying. I do not come from a prosperous constituency at all, actually. If you look at Grantham, it is indicative of a lot of the towns, market towns, that have been left behind, but maybe we can come on to that and you can get a bit of spark going. I agree completely with Bim. For me, the levelling up term has become such a good term that it's a bit like a Christmas tree. Everybody's hanging a bauble on it, so it's something to everybody. But as Bim was alluding to, you only really achieve anything if you relentlessly focus and you seek to achieve very specific things that move the needle. And for me, just like Bim, that's around economic prosperity. A great jam spreading exercise, as Boris says, economically. And that, for me, is two parts. One is productivity, which has been pervasively low for decades, quite frankly, and is getting better, but it is still pretty low compared to most of our international competitors. And that can be tackled, of course, through transport infrastructure. It can be tackled by the new skills revolution that the Prime Minister announced a short time ago. But the other aspect of this is giving people more of a stake in our economy. If you have a stake in our economy, then you are more likely to be more productive. And so the two are working hand in hand. And home ownership is a classic way in which you can do that. A job is a classic way you can do that. But one way in which I don't think gets enough attention is around savings and investments and saving for a pension. And I would like to see auto-enrollment, for example, extended to 18 to 22-year-olds so that you can start immediately, as soon as you start work at 18, you can start seeing on your payslip saving towards your retirement, and that will instill a sense of a stake in the economy, performance of the economy, and instill an appreciation of compound and saving that I think we all need to see more of. So for me, it is about economic prosperity. And then the question finally is how you pay for it. And I think one of the ways in which we've not done well enough over many decades is to mobilise more private capital. And that's why I was really excited to see the National Infrastructure Bank, which will mobilise more private capital. But there are other ways we can do that, and I'm happy to talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deanna, we'll go to you.
Really well. It's going to be quite hard now because you guys have nicked all the good ideas so far, but I'll do my best, and there's going to be a lot of agreement, I think. I think for me, levelling up is often kind of considered this woolly concept, but at the crux of it, levelling up is about people. We're getting feedback. The government doesn't like what I'm saying. Levelling up is about people, and it is about creating opportunities for people, exactly as Alex was saying. As a Conservative Party, we are a party that is built on the notion of aspiration. You know, we want people to aspire, we want people to leave a better life for future generations. And we're not weird in that. This is something that people right across our country feel, whether they vote Conservative or otherwise. People want to know that they can have a decent education, so they can get a decent job, so they can maybe buy a house, have a couple of holidays, and lead a nice life and leave something behind for their children. There's nothing perverse in that. This is why Levelling Up is very much about people. We are talking to the country, we are speaking for the country. But the issue is how we deliver that, and this comes back to some of the stuff Alex was saying. I think there is sometimes a bit of an overemphasis on spending. You know, we've seen schemes like the Levelling Up Fund and the Stronger Towns Fund, and I'm not going to lie, Bishop Auckland's benefited quite a lot from that, so I'm certainly not going to complain. But, you know, it's great in a press release to say Bishop Auckland's getting £50 million, but it's about making sure that any spending that we put in actually delivers tangible outcomes. So it delivers job opportunities, it delivers on that economic capacity that Bim was talking about. And Bim, you're exactly right, it's that sort of mobility. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up in Sheffield, in not one of the great ends of Sheffield. I was really lucky, I got a scholarship to a great school, and that really kind of set my future. But the thing wrong with that is that shouldn't have been down to luck. I shouldn't have been one of those plucked out. Every single kid living on my estate should have had access to that same quality education. But I grew up knowing that if I really wanted to make something of myself, I probably wasn't going to stay in Sheffield. I was probably going to move. And to me, it was sort of living that Oliver Twist dream, wasn't it, of moving to London to make your fortune. Well, I want to completely change that. And to me, Levelling Up is kids being able to grow up knowing that they can stay in their hometowns, get a decent job, and live that decent life, decent job, good income, buy a house, an affordable house, which I know affordability of households is a little bit different across some of our constituencies for sure, and know that they can get on in life and leave something behind for their future generations. So it's all about people, and it's about making sure we see real tangible outcomes, which is the difficulty, and which is the bit that is going to be difficult over the next few years to make sure that the reforms the government is putting in on things like T-levels to upskill people, on things like some of the infrastructure projects that are going ahead. We need to make sure they deliver for people, because otherwise I think we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Brilliant, thank you. Virginia.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's my first time here at conference as a Member of Parliament, and it's actually my first time speaking here as a Member of Parliament. I'm Virginia Crosby. I'm the MP for Ynys Môn, which many of you will know as Anglesey in North Wales. So I actually am a Member of Parliament for my own island, and it's certainly the best constituency in the UK. Now, when I was elected as the Member of Parliament for Ynys Môn, I think it's suffice to say that it was the biggest surprise of the general election, certainly to my husband. It was Plaid's #1 target seat. I am the only MP out of 650 MPs that does not have one councillor for support. It was 50-50 Leave Remain, and I don't speak the language. I only had 3 weeks, and I became the first Conservative MP for 32 years and the first woman for 70 years. Now, why? Was it because of Brexit? Well, it was 50-50 Leave Remain. Was it the Boris bounce? Or was it because the island wanted change? And really, I offered one word, and that one word is hope. And my constituents have spent the last decades watching major local employers like Anglesey Aluminium, Rehow, Shell, loads and loads of businesses leave the island. And as these businesses leave the island, they also have to say goodbye to their children, because their children have no opportunities on the island. They have to leave the island. And so that decimates communities, that decimates the Welsh language, and that decimates the culture that we have that's so important to people on the island. And we have one of the lowest GVAs of any constituency in the whole of the UK. So in North Wales, 7 out of 9 of constituencies are now blue. And that's because North Wales feels much more connected with Westminster. So I'm fighting really hard to level up my left-behind constituency of Ynys Môn. And one of the saddest things that was on my Facebook page, I get an awful lot of abuse, as you can imagine, sadly. But there's a lot of sad things. But one of the saddest things was, Virginia is ambitious. She will leave the island. Now, that is really what the island sort of actually think. Many of them think that. So what I'm trying to do is bring the island hope. I'm trying to bring jobs, investment, and opportunity. I'm essentially really banging the drum for the island, and I'm part of actually even speaking to all of you. I've had Rolls-Royce around the island, I've had Bechtel, Westinghouse, I've had the Australian High Commissioner, anyone and everyone. I'm trying to get to the island so that people can see the island for itself, to actually show that we're open for business. I'm really pushing to get free port status for the island. And I actually had breakfast with the Chancellor recently, and he said, Virginia, most people are asking for a bypass or a roundabout. He said, but every time I see you, you're asking for a nuclear power station. Now, why? Because this nuclear power station, it will bring thousands and thousands of jobs, not only to Anglesey, but to the whole of North Wales. These are absolutely fantastic jobs, fantastic career opportunities, and a real opportunity for us to level up in areas that really need it. It's also an opportunity for us to have security of energy supply and to deliver net zero, and really to try and get those relationships back with the US. So most of all, levelling up is, for me, is all about giving hope and opportunity to our young people. 70% of the people on the island speak Welsh. I'm actually going to an immersion course next week for a whole week in a monastery, so hopefully next time I see you, I might be giving this speech in Welsh. But I want these young children, when I go around the island, they say to me, Virginia, we want to be able to afford our own home. We want to be able to stay in our communities. We want to be able to celebrate all that's so fantastic about this island and its culture and its languages. And that's what I want to be able to give them. I want to be able to give them a good career, a good, solid job, and that means investing in Anglesey. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Virginia. I think that was a really, from all of you, a sort of really positive interpretation of what levelling up means. But I'm thinking back to the panel we had before, where Frank Lunt said, well, the problem with levelling up is that if you're levelling up one area, somewhere else is losing out. How do you think the government can kind of resolve that tension, Bim?
Well, if I think about this in a sort of north-south way, and I know it's more complicated than that, but I think it's fair to say a lot of people think of levelling up as something that happens in the north or the Midlands, and down south doesn't need levelling up because it's all rich, at least theoretically. So how I think about this is, what we need to do is to, in parts of the southeast, like my constituency and the constituencies around it, there is significant overheating in every considerable respect, whether it's housing, whether it's cost of living, absolutely everything, huge amounts of pressure on land and space and resources. And if we can improve the economic capacity in different parts of the country, particularly in our great cities and the suburbs of those great cities, you reduce that overheating, and that will benefit constituents like mine. And so I think there is a win-win here, which is the country as a whole becomes richer, which stops London and the southeast being such a sort of honey trap. And as a result, everybody benefits from that. But in the shorter term, because I know that sounds all sort of impossibly sort of positive and easy, in the shorter term, to go to what Virginia was saying and what my other colleagues have alluded to, that may well need more significant public investment up front on things like nuclear power, which I'm a big fan of, and other things, where those investments will actually create economic capacity, not just throwing money down the sink, but where those will create extra economic capacity for the future. In the shorter term, we need to put that investment in, because if we can do that, then over the medium, longer term, that's better for the south of England as well.
Anyone else want to come in on that point?
Well, it's not a zero-sum game, is it? The whole rising tide raises all boats, doesn't it? Everywhere which gets richer will improve the whole country. I mean, look at where we are today in Manchester. Look at Manchester Town Hall. It's a beautiful building, a lot of wealth. Sheffield, so next door to where my seat is, was a very rich, very prosperous area during the Industrial Revolution. We're trying to improve things for everyone, make sure the whole country benefits. And we do have this huge disparity at the moment between wealth in the south and southeast. There are pockets of poverty, of course, but overall, and in sort of the Midlands and the north, we need to get that on an even kilter. As Bim said, we we cannot cope with it. The country cannot cope with all the wealth and resource being sucked down to a relatively small geographical area. We need to spread that around. And I think Deanna mentioned about the Levelling Up Fund and how you didn't think that was the best thing. But I think for levelling up, you've got to see it in two ways. Short-term, almost emergency intervention, and the long-term systemic change, which we do need. But I also think we need that short-term cash injection. I mean, Diddington, in my seat, he's got applied for Levelling Up Fund. On my high street, in Diddington, the main high street, there's literally a burnt-out building opposite my office. Literally, I've been to Beirut, and trust me, the roads are worse around here than in Beirut. It's disgraceful because the money and wealth be sucked out of the area. We need that short, sharp injection of cash, frankly, from the government, which they are going to do, and then we can deal with the long-term issues. My worry, if you just deal with the long-term issues, which we do need to do, the skills, the long-term economic prospects, we're going to lose another generation, and we can't afford that.
Gareth, you were talking about needing to get more private capital into the system. Alex says we need that injection of cash. How do you think, does all that money have to come from the government, or should we be looking for other sources as well?
No, it doesn't, and this is a massive misconception in the debate nationally, I think, and as I said in my opening remarks, it's been underplayed by this government for so long. If you look at Germany, most of its infrastructure, and certainly if we talk about climate change or renewable infrastructure, most of that is funded by a development bank called KfW, which mobilises private capital through the issuance of debt and other mechanisms. So, like I said, I think the National Infrastructure Bank that the Chancellor announced will be really important for mobilising private capital. I think the move by the Treasury to hypothecate government debt as well is going to be very helpful. So the sovereign green gilt, which had its first issue the other day, it was 10 billion issue, but it was 90 billion pounds of demand in the first hour that it was released, and it just shows the level of institutional investor demand in Britain. And I think the final way is to do with pension funds and unlocking British pension funds. We're the second largest market in the world for pension fund assets. A significant amount of money is held in this country that is invested overseas, and the government are introducing what they're calling the long-term asset fund, which will enable private capital through pension funds to invest in things like infrastructure and property and things like that that are illiquid. And I think that will be really important as well. So there's lots of initiatives already going on, but we just need to double down and keep going with that.
Virginia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about free port status, and I think this is something that we do need to be cognizant of. We've got Liverpool is going to be having a free port, and essentially what we saw in England was the bidding prospectus for free ports was announced on the 11th of November last year. It closed in February of this year, and the free ports in England were announced by the Chancellor in the budget. In places like Wales, the Welsh government has not even put together a bidding prospectus, so we haven't even started the process. So we're really seeing, and places like Wales are going to be even a year behind England. And whilst we see places like Liverpool having free port status, if we're not careful, that's going to suck the lifeblood really out of North Wales, which is why I'm trying to put a free port bid together for Anglesey. It's the only one in the north of the island. And I get from the First Minister in Wales, Mark Drakeford, that Freeport is going to mean that we're going to see businesses being drawn from other parts of the country into Anglesey. And I think, no, it actually means that new businesses that actually wouldn't come to the UK, that wouldn't be coming to Wales, will be coming to invest. And we will all benefit from that. We will all benefit from that. Not just Anglesey, not just Wales, but the whole of the UK will benefit. So I really, really want to make sure we see these free ports being rolled out across the UK.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I think the original idea for free ports can be found in a report from the Centre for Policy Studies. And Deanna, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just to sort of semi-bounce back on your point there, Alex, I'm very grateful to the government for Levelling Up Fund. We plan to spend it wisely. We plan to spend it to try and foster an environment in Bishop Auckland where we get that private investment, because I think we realise that the state is not always the answer to these problems, and state spending is not the answer. And exactly as you said earlier, Gareth, it is about that private investment. Infrastructure, I think, is a little bit more complicated because infrastructure is clearly sort of national necessity, which is why the Infrastructure Bank, I think, is such a fantastic idea. But when it comes to actual business development, that's got to come from the free market. That's got to come from businesses, because businesses want to invest in particular areas. So the state spending is important, of course, but it's more about creating a policy environment and, if I may mention it, a taxation system which actually incentivises businesses not just to start up. I mean, starting up obviously is very important, particularly when we see the success of some of the tech startups and their rapid growth. But I think it's about creating an environment economically where businesses aren't afraid to take that leap from being a small business to growth, because it's that in-between stage that is so, so difficult. And that is where the real job growth and opportunities for everyday people come. Because I think often we kind of talk about economic stuff in a bit of an abstract concept. We talk about, jobs figures, and we talk about GDP. But what this is opportunities for real people having more pay going into their bank, real people living a more comfortable lifestyle, real people then being able to save up to buy their first home. I think we always have to come back to that.
Thanks. I just have one more question, then we'll go to the audience. I think another problem, and perhaps this is most acute for you, Virginia, is how can the Tories level up in parts of the country where they're not actually in charge? We've got the Department now of Levelling Up and the Union, but what can this government do for Scotland when it's not in government there?
I think the challenge that's not just about regions, it's also about in council areas. Like in my area, Rotherham Council, until the last elections this year, we had 0 councillors. The government put Rotherham in a priority level 1 for the Levelling Up Fund, yet I was told by Rotherham Council they weren't going to put in a bid because they were too busy. They were too busy to put a bid of £60 million on the government, 20 million which gone for my seat. To me, that is madness and absolutely crazy. So it's the job of an MP to basically put pressure.
Not crazy if they want to take your seat.
Well, exactly, but they put pressure, and that goes back to the Levelling Up, because in some areas, the Labour Party is so entrenched in every aspect, they will do anything, absolutely anything, to stop, frankly, the area benefiting and people seeing the benefits. So I think it's a duty of Virginia and in Wales and our Scottish MPs and us in those areas where we don't have control of the councils to put as much pressure on the area, and also make it clear to the residents and constituents, like, we have this opportunity. This government is committed to doing this level up. But on the other side, Labour are actually actively getting in the way of doing that. I think it's very clear to make it see what's going on. Because until 2019, in our area in Rotherham, there was no Conservative voice. You just heard one message, and that was from Labour. And Labour refused to, frankly, tell what was going on. Now we have all these alternative voices in Parliament elsewhere. We can use our platform to say, actually, this is a really good government. They're committed to doing this. They're committed to improving our areas. And actually, it's the other side often getting in the way.
I think, if I may, I think it's really important as well to just highlight the fact that opportunities don't stop at constituency boundaries. Just because we are fostering an environment in places like Rother Valley or in Bishop Auckland where we want businesses to come in and create jobs, you can't only apply if you live in the constituency. It also creates opportunities for the guys up in North Durham, which is a Labour seat, for example. So it's not quite as clear-cut as just because my constituency is getting stuff, it won't benefit people elsewhere. But it's about creating those opportunities for everybody, like all over the country. It is more difficult in some of the devolved areas where, the Scottish Government, for example, sometimes makes some very interesting choices, and seeing the record on education and on health outcomes, I think, is absolutely shameful, and probably shows that actually as Conservatives we need to be trying harder to make inroads, because I'm sure on this panel we'll all agree that we would do a better job of governing Scotland if we were in power in Scotland than the SNP would. So I think it's not easy, for sure, but it's kind of incumbent on all of us to try and make that happen.
Ben, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that the democratic element of this is the trickiest bit, because now correlation is not causation, but the UK is one of the most unequal in terms of regional economic capacity in Europe, if not the whole OECD. And we are also one of the most centralised states in terms of tax revenue, where tax is raised and then where it's spent. Frankly, not very much tax is raised locally and spent locally. And until we are brave enough to effectively raise more tax locally and allow local areas to incentivize different investment, local areas to experiment with things, until we're brave enough to do that, and yes, that will mean allowing the Labour Party or the SNP or whatever in certain parts of the country to benefit, because they will probably recognise the benefits of free enterprise themselves and then start to do good things. Until we're actually brave enough to do that, levelling up ultimately will always become a top-down process from Westminster going down into communities. And for this to really work, we have to work out a model whereby local areas themselves, from bottom up, can generate more of their own income and invest and get more investment. Now, Doing that in a way that is politically manageable is the tricky bit, but I think we have to recognise that is something that we have to try and do.
Virginia, is this, for you living in Wales, how do you square this circle of, levelling up in a part of the country where the Conservatives aren't actually in charge?
It's really interesting. Whenever I'm sort of asked about what it was like to be a member of Parliament and really what's the biggest surprise, and I think for me, the biggest surprise is the amount of support that we get, whether it's other MPs or whether it's ministers. It's absolutely phenomenal. And as I mentioned earlier, I had an hour with the Chancellor last week. We get an awful lot of time with ministers. I've had 4 ministers came to Anglesey over just actually in August. So my island is it's interesting. We've got this 80-seat majority, and it's fantastic having so many of these safe seats. But the reason we've got this 80-seat majority is because of seats like Ynys-Môn. So you do really feel that Ynys-Môn is front and centre of government, of the government's agenda. And my constituency really, really feels that. They're absolutely over the moon. They were mentioned by the Chancellor in the budget in March when I got £5 million for the Holyhead Hydrogen Hub. They were so excited when the Prime Minister on the BBC the other day actually mentioned Wilfa Newydd. So they're really feeling that for the first time in decades that they actually have a voice. And with that voice, I'm a real advocate of nudging. I've got 3 teenagers and I used to be a math teacher, so I think I'm really a fan of that. And I try and nudge ministers towards the things that I'm trying to get delivered. And one of the ways we can do that is written questions. Now, my staff actually said there was 1 week in July, I wrote more written questions in 1 week to ministers than the previous MP had written in 19 years. So I think as a class of 2019, we really are being a voice for so many of these seats that previously have not had a voice. And so for things like the inland border facility, Holyhead is the second busiest ro-ro port in the UK, and we needed to have an inland border facility. It was going to be either in Warrington, it was going to be in Bangor, and I lobbied every single week for 12 months, and it's now going to be in Holyhead, and it's life-changing. That's 230 jobs, 230 families in a really deprived area that will absolutely benefit. And even MPs like myself, I decided to have my office actually on the island rather than in Westminster. I've got this tiny office in Westminster, I sit by myself, and all my staff are on the island. And when I phoned up one of my staff to actually offer her a job, she nearly burst into tears and she said, Virginia, this is a job with training and a pension and will allow me to buy a home. So really, this is what levelling up means for them. They've actually got a voice now.
Thanks. And Gareth, did you have any comments on sort of this tension between levelling up and the union?
I think there are other people like Virginia that are better qualified, I think, to talk about the union. But the only thing I would just say is it has been, investment has been over-concentrated in the southeast and London for so long. I think that London gets 3 times the level of infrastructure spending, for example, compared to the rest of the country. And I think the whole of the UK is 30% less productive than London as well. So it is about putting in place the mechanisms which enable people to stay where they grow up, but also for people to move around the country a lot easier as well. And I think that's, again, why bread and butter infrastructure is so vital to this.
Can I just quickly challenge one point made by the panel? I can just challenge you, Bim, about taxation and level. And I want to say it's great. I think in theory it's great to have localised taxation, localised accountability. But seats like mine, 101 years of Labour, has had a massive amounts of decline. And frankly, it's been ruled in an incompetent way. And I wouldn't trust my local council to raise taxes. They wouldn't put them to my seat anyway. They funnel all the money into Rotherham Central. I don't think we can trust them. And that's why I think the government needs to have these top-down emergency procedure while we deal with the structural issues. And that's why it's desperate to get it in there now.
Look, I agree with that, and I could feel you bristling as I said it. But the point is more that you can't run an emergency forever. If we want this to really be successful, beyond a couple of parliamentary cycles, we have to somehow work a process which outlasts us being MPs or us being in government, right? And that we have to work out what that looks like. By the way, that may mean reorganisation of local government. It may mean all sorts of things that you'll know much better in your area than I do. But I just think that it is not a sustainable outcome to effectively see levelling up as something that has to be decided from the centre, because guess what? If Labour are in charge, and one day they will be, One day they will be. At that point, we will then be saying, gosh, why did we not put in place structures that allow us to do this in certain parts of the country that we do control?
Thanks. Anyone in the audience have a question? Oh, lots. Who's got the microphones? Should we go to the gentleman at the back?
I thought I'd come a bit closer. Hi, my name's Alan. I'm Chair of Salford Conservatives. What we have in Salford is it's as red as you can get. There are 60 councillors on Salford Council and 52 are Labour, which is nothing compared to Manchester, where there's about 90 councillors and 89 are Labour. But in places like Salford and places like Manchester, it's very much like, Ernest Moore and Bishop Auckland and all these areas that have been red for generations or Clyde or whatever, and they've now come over to the blue side. What we've seen over there is we've seen a lot of investment, we've seen a lot of levelling up, if you like, but when we still knock on doors on, social housing estates and, a lot of areas where the Conservatives are still not popular, the general consensus is they just don't feel that they're listened to. And there's this general consensus that all politicians are liars or they steal or because of expenses and all this, there's a lot of perception about this. So I think that levelling up, or the term, would be a really good way to kind of prove actually you are being listened to. But I'd actually like to hear from yourselves your experiences of actually like how you can break into these communities, like first-hand experiences, how you've managed to do that, and obviously any advice that you can give to ourselves.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on the basis that I represent Bishop Auckland in County Durham. County Durham has effectively been Labour since the dawn of time until May, when we somehow have created some sort of pseudo-rainbow coalition of anyone but Labour. So the Conservatives now are jointly in administration in County Durham. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I ever thought County Durham would be anything but red, I would have said absolutely not. But it is through the work of some of my incredible activists, good messaging, and really getting out there and getting some really top-notch candidates in place who are willing to go into some of those tough areas, to campaign, to be out there when it's raining and hailing, to have face-to-face conversations with people. Because as you rightly said there, Alan, people feel like they haven't been listened to, and it is incredible just how much going out there and asking people what their thoughts are and actually listening, not moving on to the next door within 30 seconds because you need to get data, actually having a meaningful conversation with them really means. So in my own constituency, we have 19 councillors in total. We had 5 up until May. We now have 12. Partly it's getting really good candidates in place who are willing to work really hard, and partly it was about trying to sell a different vision, something really different for what we would do in administration if we made it. And I think the Conservative government is giving us some really top quality stuff. The fact that we're even talking about levelling up, we're talking about opportunities, we're trying to give people hope. And give people opportunities that perhaps their fathers, their grandfathers never had, I think is a really positive thing. But I think perseverance is key. We're a party that believes in personal responsibility and hard work, so I'm calling on you, Alan, to get out there and go make it work in Salford.
Who wants to come in next?
Alice?
Yeah, Virginia.
Yeah, I can totally empathise with where you're coming from. At the count at the general election, you're allowed 12 guests, and I didn't know 12 people to invite. So I took my kids along, and my dog wasn't allowed entry. So when I first landed, I sort of set about really trying to get some support and get some friends. So I said to people, judge me by my actions, not by my words. And very early on in the coronavirus crisis, I set up a pharmacy prescription delivery group to pick up prescriptions, and then I'd lay them out by village. It was a great opportunity to get to know the constituency, and then people would come and pick them and then deliver them. And I got to know people like that, and that sort of thing really gets out. I launched a Mental Health 100 campaign to get 100 people trained in mental health earlier this year, and I got all of that fully funded by investors. I've launched a Hidden Hero campaign. I do lots of sort of rolling my sleeves up and actually getting involved. And I have to share with you, this is a seminal moment in my constituency when on Monday I launched my Christmas card competition, but I wanted the Christmas card to be fully funded and all the delivery as well. So I was looking for some supporters. I contacted 15 people to ask them to sponsor the Christmas card and its delivery and put their logo on it. The local Plaid butcher said yes. The tractor company said yes. The local auction house said yes. The local fish and chip shop said yes. And literally, I've got so much money. I'm actually now going to do a calendar that's actually going to go in it. So that's within nearly 2 years. It's just... some people say to me they've never had such a hard-working MP, and one of the best comments I've had is, Virginia, you're hard to hate. I'll take it.
Anyone else? Anyone else hard to hate?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's not what we say in the tea room, but I guess it's all about the perseverance knocking the doors. And I think also got to realise that there's in my seat, there's a lot of anti-Labour support. There has been a lot of anti-Labour support for over a decade. But it's actually crystallising behind the Conservatives, because there very much was a narrative that Conservatives couldn't win, therefore there's no point voting Conservative. So they'd vote for, there were BNP councillors on Rotherham Council, there were UKIP councillors, there were Brexit councillors, there were every other shade of denomination, but not Conservative, because people were convinced Conservatives couldn't win. So it's very much sort of a vicious circle. You've got to show residents that, first of all, they're listening to them, that's the most important thing, but then also that you can win. Because once people realise that their vote for Conservatives is not a wasted vote, the anti-Labour vote will coalesce around the Conservatives, and that is incredibly important. But the one thing is knock on doors. Again and again throughout the campaign in 2019, I heard we'd never seen a politician. The previous Labour MP had been there for 36 years. They'd never seen him. They never saw any activists. People took it for granted. They took everything about the area for granted. So suddenly when you have people coming in, knocking on doors, speaking to people, even if they don't agree with you, they respect that, they like that, they want that. And it's quite helpful that way just to get out there and knock on doors. People really, really appreciate it.
Ben or Gareth, did you want to give this man some help?
I really don't have that much to add. I think it is shoe leather. All politics is local, so put national policy in a very local, hyper-local context. But it is about shoe leather, getting in front of people and showing that you have shared values. Because actually, my experience is that just having a conversation with people, no matter where they live, they need to know that there's no no-go areas for Conservatives. And actually, we have so much more in common in terms of our shared values of aspiration, working hard, going to work every day, putting food on the table, that kind of thing will win votes ultimately.
I hope that's helpful. I think we maybe take two at a time. So there was this gentleman here and Alex as well.
Thanks. Just wanted to ask about business investment and private investment. I think you've all agreed that it needs to be not just the state, it needs to be the private sector as well. But we've already had 11 or so years of Conservative government. We've tried tax cuts, we've tried, growth funds of various kinds to attract private investment. We still haven't got that increase in productivity and growth that we're looking for. So what will this administration have to do differently to what the coalition has done previously? And do we actually need to be asking some really hard questions about business in this country and its willingness to invest long term in the places that you're representing?
Given that taxes have gone up quite a lot, including on working people with the national insurance rise, and you've been talking, understandably in some ways, about the need to spend more on certain areas, skills, infrastructure and so on, it'd be great if the panel could say one thing that is not anything to do with levelling up that the government currently does, that it should stop doing to pay for all the things, or which tax they would like to go up to pay for the things that they've been discussing.
Yeah, well, first the HS2.
HS2.
Give it that's 150 billion saved, so that's a lot of tax cuts for everyone, which is good. But for the first question, I completely agree with you. The government talks about building back better, creating new jobs. Great. We can't create new jobs with what we've got. We need to build further new industries. We need that new industrial revolution. I very much believe going net zero is the way forward. The whole world is going low carbon. If we get there first and faster with the new technologies, whether it's hydrogen, potentially whether it's nuclear, we can actually then export that knowledge and expertise across the globe and fundamentally create jobs and wealth in the United Kingdom. Like in my seat, Rother Valley has 6 former pits, all closed now, but we have a potential of being a hydrogen hub with ITM Power on the doorstep. There are these new jobs coming about. We can, if we seize the opportunity, we can really retool our economy in the next 10 years to create those new jobs in seats like mine and seats like the north of England or Anglesey to recreate that wealth. So we have this opportunity if we're brave enough to seize it.
Diana, did you want to come in next?
Well, Alex, to your question, I mean, I agree with this, Alex, on HS2. I was fairly vocal about that when I first got elected, and I still think there are better ways that we can deliver the needed infrastructure improvements without spending that much money. So it's a very simple answer, but that's what I do to save a bit of dosh. On the sort of productivity question, I think one of the things that I found really encouraging in the Chancellor's budget was his thing around super deductions. I bang on about this all the time. I used to work for an accountancy firm doing R&D, so this was like a really big part of how we would advise our clients to try and make the most of tax incentives to encourage them to invest to improve their own productivity. I work with all kinds of companies, from food production, work with a great peanut butter manufacturer who are doing some incredible things to really improve their processes, but all the way up to engine part manufacturers. And they were all investing in capital, in plant, but also in their workforce too, in upskilling their workforce. And I think one of the great things that we are doing is this kind of push towards apprenticeships and towards more technical education, which will hopefully allow us to have a much more skilled workforce, which means it will be a much more productive workforce as well. But, unfortunately, I don't think we can kind of click our fingers and make it happen overnight, but I'm hoping some of these schemes brought together will mean in the future we get there and we manage to outdo some of our European rivals in terms of productivity.
Virginia, if there's one thing that you would stop or...
My background's actually finance. I was an investment banker for many years. So actually, I think your question was quite interested in terms of how do we get businesses. And having one of the best nuclear power station sites on the island, quite rightly, I'm very focused on not only large nuclear, but SMR, small modular reactors. And I think the government can do an awful lot here to encourage investment in this sector. When you look at these big sort of CapEx infrastructure projects, it's about the risk. Who's going to take that risk? It's that weighted average cost of capital. So I think we should be looking at instruments like the RAB, the Regulated Asset Base model for finance that we use with the Thames Tideway Tunnel. I think we should be looking at the government putting additional money into SMRs. There's around £5 billion of private investor money waiting to come into SMRs. So the government really does need to lead on these things because I think it will benefit in the long term.
Bim, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think, why haven't we, we've had 11 years of Tory government, and why haven't, by the next election it'll be, we've had 14 years of Tory government, how are you guys still... The truth is, we haven't actually been trying to do all these things for 11 years. If you go down memory lane, 2010 to 2015, we had a singular focus of the government, which was to reduce the deficit. Mm-hmm. Then we went into Brexit. That basically took the best part of 5 years. And so actually, frankly, because Brexit and the parliamentary rows over Brexit really sapped not just our capacity to live, but also just the attention span of government. I think a lot of things drifted in that time. And we haven't had a government that is actually focusing on the levelling up, the things we're talking about, frankly, for 11 years. We haven't. So now we're focusing on it. And a key thing is, within the United Kingdom, how do those investments work? When George Osborne was Chancellor, we got a lot of foreign direct investment into the country, lots of great figures, lots and lots of billions. But you actually look at the distributional effects and where those were actually going even more towards London, the southeast, and university towns. So I think that actually we haven't really been focusing on it. And in relation to, where do I find the money? And this is, a very you question. Couple of things. One is by the way, I completely agree with Alex's point around the green industrial revolution. I think we need to embrace it wholeheartedly. What does that look like? Landfill taxes, double them. Let's look at other ways in which we should raise taxes on carbon-intensive things, set out very clearly to incentivize investment in low-carbon alternatives. So you can raise quite a lot of money in the short term by doing that, but actually what you're doing is you are directing capital to go to the things that we need them to go to. So that's how I would think about it. And in addition to that, the point Deanna made about skills, couldn't agree with more. We're trying to do our best. There's T-levels. We're putting a lot more effort and investment into FE. I think we need to go further, and we need to restore some control over student numbers on courses at university that we know, through evidence that can be all set out very clearly, do not provide economic return to students and leave young people with debt that they will never be able to repay, and that leaves them feeling, disenchanted with the whole system. It's unfair on them, it's expensive for the Treasury, and those guys would be a lot better off if they had those better opportunities in apprenticeships and maybe degree apprenticeships further down the line.
Thanks, Ben. Gareth, anything to add?
I would just pick up on what Virginia was saying about what we call the viability gap. And that's one of the reasons why you've had London and the South East take so much of the investment capital over decades is because you're more likely to make money on your investment in that area than you are in other parts of the country historically. And the things that Deanna's talking about, the skills revolution and things like that, will obviously help significantly over the long term. But I think the government does have a role, can have a role, to meet that initial, if it's infrastructure building, construction risk issue, to enable more private capital to come in. But the viability gap on commercial real estate, for example, is a big problem in Grantham. We don't have enough offices for all the small businesses that we have locally. And the reason is that the landowners and the guys who own the properties don't want to do up the buildings to rent them out because they're not getting enough money from the rent. So it's that viability gap that the government can find innovative ways through taxation or through other means to enable private capital come in afterwards.
Okay, we'll take two more. This gentleman here at the front.
We've got an online question that we might throw in as well.
Yeah, let's go online.
So this is from...
Someone's watching.
Online. In areas of the north, such as where I live in Leeds, transport is such an issue. How do the panel think that this fits into the levelling up agenda?
Thank you. Should we do another one from this gentleman in the blue tie at the front?
Hi everybody. I'm not going to pretend I'm the average 25-year-old. I mean, I'm at Tory conference. But there's only two things I want from a government. It's my taxes to stay low, and I want to be able to buy a home. And I'm pretty sure I'm looking at 5 MPs that just voted to raise my taxes, and that your Tory MPs has a good chance you've engaged in some NIMBYistic actions over your time as an MP. So my question for you, the panel, is when it comes to levelling up, are young people really going to appreciate that if it means those two things which a Tory government is perpetuating? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a real key point, isn't it? There's, it's cost of living is really what people are going to be most worried about, and what is going to be the kind of biggest thing at the next election that decides how they vote. So how do you solve this problem?
I'm really glad you asked the question. I think about this a lot. We're not doing enough for people like you. Though if you're coming to Tory Party conference, maybe you're okay. But what would I do to deal with that? I think that we need to look at marginal tax rates of young working people urgently, because it is not a sustainable scenario that they are paying the taxes that they're paying. I got my office to pull out some comparison stats. So we think European Union has high taxes, right, on the whole. And they do, broadly. But actually, you look at the marginal tax rates of young people in Europe compared to this country, very similar. And in fact, we're higher than quite a lot of them. So that is something we need to focus on urgently. And the second point around home ownership, there's a paper by this individual called Ian Mulhern, and he's done a lot of research on home affordability. And well, you can read the paper, but it's pretty persuasive that it's not in and of itself simply building more and more homes alone that really affects affordability. It's a mixture of that, but critically how we finance it, the ways how you get mortgages and the amount of deposit you need, and all those sorts of aspects that are, in fact, more significant on home affordability. That doesn't mean we don't build homes, but it does mean that we have to look at those other aspects, because if we're building more homes and then they're just being bought by wealthy pensioners to let out, you haven't actually improved your ability to buy a home at all. So I think we probably need to look at that end of things, and also we need to reduce your tax rate so you can actually afford to save for a deposit, because at the moment it is a scandal, and I think that, frankly, I'm surprised more people in your generation aren't angrier about it.
Deanna and Alex, the gentleman online was asking about transport. But I mean, improving that, investing in infrastructure like that takes an incredibly long time to deliver. By the next election, people want to see a real difference to their lives. They want to see that you've delivered. How can you do that?
I think it depends on the infrastructure that we're talking about. I think often when we think about transport, we think about things like HS2, we think about these huge major schemes. Well, in my constituency, people are just like a bus that they can get on to get from one village to the next. So it can be very simple. And it's about putting in place incentives for bus operators to run. I know there was an experiment going on further into the Tees Valley with a sort of Uber-style bus system. I have no idea how it works. I'm not actually in that area, but I think we need to be really inventive to get people from A to B. Leeds, being a city, has slightly better transport links, but even so, I do think we need to stop focusing on the kind of gold-plated infrastructure projects sometimes and actually think about, particularly in parts of the world like ours, Alex, just people being able to get to jobs or people being able to get to the supermarket if they don't drive or whatever that might be. And I think that comes down to buses.
Yeah, I completely agree with Johanna. As I mentioned, the High Street in Dinnington, if you want to go between my two biggest towns, Maltby and Dinnington, it's about 5.2 miles as the crow flies. It takes over an hour and you have to get two different buses. And the main shopping street's in one, there's jobs in the other. It doesn't work out, so it's ridiculous. Going on to touching the home stuff, some of this to me actually goes to the very heart of levelling up. Because I don't believe we do have a housing crisis in the United Kingdom. There are lots of houses, and there's quite cheap houses in different parts of the United Kingdom. But if there's no jobs and no facilities and no transport, they're not going to have people living there. And that goes back to try and rebalance the economy and get people into the areas where there is plentiful housing stock, which you can betterly afford, and we can have financial models to get into that. But we need the jobs there first. Because we have so much of the wealth and jobs down the London South East, it is skewing everything. But don't get me wrong, even homes in my constituency are often incredibly unaffordable because we are fundamentally building the wrong type of homes. In my area, we need more one-bedroom, two-bedrooms for houses. And also we need, frankly, bungalows for older people. The house builders don't want to build that. They want to build 4- and 5-bedroom homes, which they can sell off-plan, often to foreign investors. And that is where fundamentally the government needs to step in and say, we don't want to build these sort of homes. We know what homes we want. We shouldn't have the homes being offered for sale in Malaysia and Singapore as currently happens. And I know this is probably not good for this audience, but we do need more state intervention about where the homes get sold first. And that, to me, is incredibly important to give people like you the opportunity to buy the home that you want, and the right sort of home as well. None of this sort of Lego building, ghastly housing estate where everything looks the same, whether it's from Bishop Auckland down to Surrey. We want to have unique homes, beautiful homes, well built, you want to actually live in, and want to have character in as well. So the whole gambit we should look at.
I think if I may just very quickly make one point on what you were just saying, Alex. I think if we can see one positive to come out of the pandemic, it's home working, flexible working, and being able to do your job if you're in a sort of more services job digitally, which means that in places like ours, we need to be pitching ourselves as digital commuter towns. Move to Bishop Auckland, come and get a home for 150 grand, do your job based in the southeast where you're earning, 50 grand a year. Easy squeezy, isn't it, Alex? I mean, come on, come to Bishop Auckland. This is my rallying cry.
It's funny that you looked at me when you said 50 grand a year. Virginia.
Yeah, absolutely. You young people, you're really going to feel the brunt of coronavirus, and I really, really do feel for you, and we need to look after you. And it's really important that you can afford to buy your own home. But if you look in Wales, there are more empty properties in Wales than there are second homeowners. Now, all you hear in Wales is second homeowners, tourists. Let's just get those 25,000 empty homes filled. Let's build some homes that people want. The Welsh Government in 2019 built less than 60 council houses. Let's just start building. Let's get some great homes for people like you.
Yeah, Gareth?
Yeah, just as a Leeds boy, I'll pick up the Leeds question about transportation. I think one of the issues that we've had historically on transport infrastructure in particular is how fast, towns and cities can get to London. And big, bold infrastructure projects have been about how quickly you can get to London rather than how you can get around the place you live. And I think that's something that we need to sort of try and shift. The digitisation, though, we shouldn't underestimate this. It has been, one of the few positives of the pandemic is that it has shown that we can work from home, we can work from places. Google have got a huge office. I think their headquarters is in King's Cross. But I'm trying to get some of their workers to work in Grantham because we're 56 minutes by train to London. There I am making my own mistake and how quickly you can get to London. But if they do need to go and see their boss, who, let's face it, probably is based in London, they can do. But there's no reason why they can't set up shop in Grantham and work from there. And I think this has been one of the things that we'll see in the years to come. Increasingly, we are able now, particularly with we don't often talk about this, but we have actually made great strides in digital connectivity as a government. Grantham's got some of the fastest speeds in the country, by the way, and so move to Grantham. But honestly, we have, and we don't talk about some of our successes enough, I think. And part of it is post-COVID, but part of it is the investments we've already made in digital connectivity.
That's great, thanks. So I think that's almost all we have time for, but perhaps just to round off, when it comes to the next election, you're knocking on doors and constituent asks you, what have you levelled up? What one thing do you say to them? Ben, let's start with you.
they will probably say to me, have you kept my taxes down and are my services still good, actually? Because I think they perceive levelling up as something that happens to other parts of the country. And I hope to be able to say yes to both of them.
Alex?
Have you delivered on your promise to improve our high street and give that emergency cash injection with the Levelling Up Fund? I hope to say yes. The evidence is there and it's been done.
Nice and simple. Deanna?
I was going to go on high streets, but instead I'll say better buses for Bishop.
Gareth?
I think it's one question, do I have a job or not?
Virginia?
I want to say, wow, Virginia, because of you, we've now got Freeport status on Anglesey.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really interesting discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, and sorry if I didn't get to your questions. Just remains to say, come to all CPS and CapX events, subscribe to the CapX newsletter, check out our online content. We're going to be producing stuff from conference all week. And thank you so much to my panellists. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to introduce everyone at the start.
Don't worry at all.
So excited to start talking about levelling up.
Aren't we all? I know.
No.
Don't think we're going to be talking about anything else.
The whole time about this